So it's 7.3% is probably the weakest quarter since the global financial crisis. I suppose there's no surprise there. China has been slowing down for a considerable period of time now. So I think it's basically on the back of this massive structural change in the China's economy. The investment is slowing down. The property sector is showing weakness. So the whole string of factors contributed to this weak performance in the third quarter of this year.
The property sector is something that seems to be worrying a lot of people right now. What exactly is it about it that's problematic in China?
So it's a problem. It's a combination of a whole string of things. So it's basically an oversupply in parts of China, for example, in the second and third tier cities, that kind of regional cities in China. For example, in a city called Changsha, it's kind of a provincial city in China. So for past a decade, the property construction has been growing at 20%, and the population is only 3%. So as you can say, it's kind of a massive overbuild. At the same time, we have to remember that China has no kind of restriction on the movement of people, even for its own citizens, because if you're a rural migrant, you need to obtain an urban residential permit before you can actually allow to live in the city. So there's actually kind of artificial barriers in the place to prevent them from buying houses in the cities. But a lot of governments, be it a provincial and a central government, is actually relaxing that at the moment.
Now, as we know, what comes up must come down, but 7.5% is still a pretty comfortable level of growth. Are we expecting things to plateau here? I mean, they've been falling, or are they going to continue to fall, do you think?
Well, I suppose that's the kind of $42 trillion question. So that's one of the best paper actually on this topic is basically by two Harvard professors, including Lawrence Summers, the former US Treasury Secretary. And he's saying that China is so exceptional. It's been growing at above 6% for 33 years, unprecedented in history, because the usual duration of such high speed is usually just about 9 years. Then they just drop off. In China's case, 33 years, no drop off. So he's basically saying, statistically speaking, for China to continue at that pace is going to be an extraordinary tail event. So he's speaking statistically, and this just has never happened before. So I suppose the question whether China is able to continue to grow at the future pace is a question whether China can continue to defy the law of economics.
It's going to be an interesting one to watch, but how are you expecting, the regulators to respond to this?
In China, I think at the moment, the regional government and the central government have been relaxing about housing restriction. But at the moment, the most important regulator of all is the Chinese central bank. They seems to be playing quite cool at the moment because they are now cutting interest rates. They are not reducing the bank capital reserve ratio, which is 20%. It's like very significant buffer. Because at the moment, they are tolerating this slowdown because they think it's quite healthy to actually engineer a slowdown, because otherwise, you can keep pumping the money into the system, artificially prop up the sector, but eventually you're going to have an asset bubble burst. So at the moment, what the central banks are trying to do is try to gently deflect the bubble at the moment. So I think they are doing what they can to prop up the sector without actually injecting too much cash into the system.
You've been reasonably strong before in saying that you don't think we'll see any cash stimulus out of China. Do you think things have to get a lot worse before we'd actually start to see that situation unfold?
Yeah, I think at the moment the property sector is slowing down, but one thing is we have to remember in China, there's not going to be a replay of a subprime mortgage crisis, because that's what people kind of are saying. But the situation in China is very different. People need to cough up 30% cash for their first home. Actually, you have to cough up 30% just to qualify for mortgage. In Beijing and Shanghai, you have to cough up 40%. And so basically, the mortgage quality in China is actually very high. It's actually the highest amongst all of asset class in China. And Chinese property developers are kind of, especially the stronger ones, are also reasonably kind of in reasonable shape. They have been deleveraging from about 90% to about, in terms of debt to their asset, to about 50%. So I think, all evidence are kind of saying, they may be able to scrap through, but if there's going to be kind of accumulation of huge debt, if the properties, developer are started going bust in large numbers, and if people start defaulting, then you see a lot more active intervention policy from the central bank. At the moment, they seem to be confident, or at least, yeah.
Okay. Last question.
Yeah.
Not all of us have the hours to pore over Chinese economic statistics like you do. So what's the one thing we should be keeping an eye on in the next couple of months?
I think there are actually probably three things we're going to keep an eyes on. One is the housing sector is very important. The second one is local government debt. And the third one is how China going to address the industrial overcapacity. I think that's the three things I'll be keeping eyes on.
Fantastic. Will do. Peter Tsai, thanks very much.
Thank you, Eric.